All right, now all we have left to finish is the waist seam, going all the way around the waist. So we're gonna do this the same way that we did the leg seams. We're gonna first do a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch overlap all the way around. And we're gonna try to match up from seam to seam. We're gonna try to get these seams to line up each time. That way, when we get all the way around, we don't have a bunch of excess. We can kind of check ourselves basically at each seam, make sure they line up. So to do this, I'm gonna use my jar and I'm gonna go ahead and I'll start here at this seam. Put a little bit of glue. I'm gonna go between a 1/16 to an 1/8. You don't wanna go any more than that, otherwise you're gonna run into problems with a mismatch of material. The more you curl it over, the more you're gonna have a discrepancy of length on the inner versus the outer. So to keep that discrepancy as low as possible, you wanna do as little of an overlap, just enough to keep it together. That's the idea. The strength is gonna come when we put the strip over it. So now that I've got this part here anchored, I'm gonna kind of peel it back a little bit. Do whatever length I feel comfortable with. I'm gonna go for maybe about 2 inches. If you're just starting out, you might want to do about a 1/2 inch to an inch. Otherwise, the more you have to deal with it each time, the more stressful it's going to be, and the more time it's going to take that it might dry out. Kind of stretching it a little bit as I go to try to make sure there's no wrinkles. And as I get closer to the next seam, I'm going to try to make it line up the best that I can. I'm not really close enough yet. I need to do another little run here. I can kind of use my glue to like release a little bit of what I just did, especially if it's starting to kind of veer away. You know, you want it to be a parallel line, and it does tend to like be parallel, and then all of a sudden it kind of will veer a little bit towards the end. And that's because when we lay this down over here, you're not really probably caring so much about if it's still running parallel, because that part's not really glued, but that last little bit can kind of veer away. We occasionally want to kind of pull this apart so that we can look for wrinkles like this, because we want to get rid of these wrinkles. In fact, we can kind of work it more like this. If you basically pull some of this material through so that your seam is over here, you can actually kind of catch these a little bit earlier on. And while you still have access to the other side, you can always, if you got something weird going on, you can always kind of look at it from the inside. See, I have a little bit of a wrinkle here. And in fact, what I could do is I could take my syringe, I can kind of put a little bit of glue and get up under there. I can kind of use the glue to, kind of the way you use acetone on a Q-tip, you can kind of use it to release it, because it has those solvents in it. I'm not using very much. I really should actually be using gloves right now, but I unfortunately just used the last pair I had. The bad part about not using gloves is the solvents will actually kind of dry out your skin real bad. So if you want to avoid that, then I would recommend using the gloves. I will just have to give myself lots of lotion later. All right, so looks pretty good. I'm gonna see how I'm lining up here. Peel this back just a little bit. And then let's look and see how this next seam is gonna line up. So it's a little bit off, but if I kind of work with it, I can stretch it so that they line up. Let's see. Resituate all this. I don't feel comfortable doing all the way to the seam, but I'll do most of it. I'll come pretty close. I would do about that much of it. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna kind of stretch that so that it lines up, and then pat down the spot that's glued. But that way, once I get a little bit closer, that's already kind of stretched so that it's gonna line up. Now, whenever I come across a factory seam, I always try to put a little bit more glue because there's a bump right here. If I want it to seal, starting to get a little bit more than an 1/8 inch overlap. I'm going to need to kind of try to back off a little bit. For some reason right in here it kind of started to get a little bit more. As long as we can kind of catch that, I'm going to kind of try to straighten that up and get back to my 1/8 inch or less as I continue on. All right, so now we'll just keep on going, and I'm going to stop the video here. We'll check back in a little bit.